Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all, comrades, for coming and joining us here. Welcome back to another Southeast Asian Life Solidarity online talk series. Tonight, held at 7 p.m. in Indonesia or Thailand time, or 8 p.m. in Malaysia or the Philippines. And thanks for joining us from Southeast Asia or from other parts of the world. I'm Ikra Anugrah. You can call me Ikra. I'm a member of the Working People's Party in Indonesia, and I'm also a researcher and a participant on social movement issues, particularly in Indonesia. And today, I will be your moderator for our discussion tonight. The topic of our discussion tonight is democracy under attack in Southeast Asia, which is a timely topic given the situation that we are facing in the region these days, with the rise of authoritarian rule and increasing repression in different countries across the region. We have suppression of pro-democracy protests in Thailand, military coup in Burma, the increasing political control in Malaysia under the pretext of containing the corona pandemic, and the repression against the anti-neoliberal law protesters in Indonesia. So democracy is currently under attack in the region, and this is something that is concerning for every one of us here, for those who are active in social movements and the struggle for greater democracy, for social justice, and for the interest of the working people and the lower classes. And what can we learn from these struggles for democracy in the region? What is to be done to overcome these challenges, this increasing authoritarian rule, and more importantly, what are the prospects of developing a transnational solidarity in the region, especially among leftist and progressive social movements and forces. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you to our four speakers for tonight. We have Muhammad Ridho, Nalini Elumalai, Rehana Muhyiddin, Cham, Chacha Pumpuang, and Debbie Stothard. I would like to briefly introduce our speakers for our discussion tonight. Muhammad Ridho, or Ridho, is a member of Working People's Party. He's currently a PhD, a doctoral candidate at Northwestern University in the United States, researching labor politics in Southeast Asia. Nalini Elumalai is a grassroots and a human rights activist. She is a member of the Central Committee of the Socialist Party of Malaysia and has been actively involved in grassroots movements concerning workers, the rural poor, and plantation workers, among others. Rehana Muhyiddin is a socialist and a feminist activist. She's also a scientist working on socio-technical and transformative solutions to building resilience. And she leads the international work of the Party of the Laboring Masses in the Philippines. And Chacha Pumpuang, or Cham, is the co-founder of Food Production, and he also co-founded Workers Union with the intention to build a general union in Thailand. And he also founded Union of Creatives and Cultural Workers, or UCC, to build networks of workers working in creative industries in Thailand. And lastly, Debbie Stothard. Debbie is an active promoter of human rights in Burma and the Southeast Asian region, the ASEAN region more broadly. She founded the Alternative ASEAN Network on Burma, or ASEAN Burma, in 1996. And she's been actively involved in human rights advocacy, and she has worked as a journalist a community education consultant, a government advisor, and trainer in countries such as Malaysia, Australia, and Thailand. And I'm very excited to hear to hear about our discussion tonight, to hear what our speakers will share and will talk about in their presentation. We are greatly helped by our two interpreters for tonight, Alec, as well as Alfian, who will help us with Thai and Indonesian interpretations. So I would like to start with Nalini. So please, Nalini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Igra. Hi, everyone. Friends, my fellow speakers and comrades, thanks for joining us today. But before I begin my presentation today, I really would like to take this opportunity on behalf of Party Socialist Malaysia to give our utmost respect and solidarity with people in Myanmar who are currently fighting against the regime and the violence that's going on. And we hope that our solidarity and our spirit will be with them and for them to reclaim the democratic space that's going on at the moment. So I would like to just to state that we are in solidarity with them at this point of time. So I would like to start with what is the situation in Malaysia. So before COVID-19, in 2020, there was a change of government. So we had 60 years of UMNO Barisan Nasional. And then in 2018, there was a historical moment when there was a change of government from UMNO Barisan Nasional to Pakatan Harapan. And then again in 2020, in less than 2 years, the government changed again to Perikatan Nasional. It was very interesting point of time because when the government was changing in 2020 February, Party Socialist Malaysia, we were having a big meeting with the marginalized communities because we actually had a plan to do a very huge mobilization end of the year. So we were having like discussion with all these marginalized communities coming from plantation workers and everyone discussing throughout the day. And then the end of the day, the government changed, and we kind of like, so now what we're gonna do? And the situation was made worse when the COVID-19 was going on. And of course, suddenly there was a lockdown and nobody can do anything. So massive use of repressive laws to detain, arrest people that disobey the movement control order. But of course, the government was saying that we have to do this because of COVID-19, and we have to make sure we totally understand the concern. Sorry? Okay, so we totally understand the concern. The government has duty to do to counter the COVID-19, but we can see the disproportionate amount of repressive laws being used to detain and arrest people. There was attacks and hate speech against the minorities. While they were countering COVID-19 and things like that, there was massive attacks and hate speech against minorities like Rohingya and undocumented migrants. People were detained, people were not allowed to have COVID-19 tests and so on and so forth from these communities. There was a massive attacks on media, and it has actually have given a lot of a risk when it's come to flow of informations, because we are only getting the information from the government, and media have been constantly under attack throughout the year and still being under attack. And I can just say two of the main media that was going through a massive harassment and attack was, of course, Malaysia Kini, who was made convicted for third-party comments in their website, and of course Al Jazeera for the documentary on raid against migrants, and they were raided, they were investigated, so this massive attacks on media and journalists was not allowed to cover the news on COVID-19, right? And we have activists and human rights defenders were targeted for critical of governments. There are so many activists and human rights defenders were called for investigation. And human rights defenders who actually stood together with the Rohingyas or migrants has been called for investigation. Journalists who reported on the raid on migrants were called for investigation. Unionists were arrested just because they were asking for better protection for frontliners and hospital cleaners. They were charged, but eventually the charge would drop. But these are the situations that was going on and still going on in Malaysia. And what made it worse, in January 2021, the centralized power of the government, the Perikatan Nasional, and the background of it, there's the instability in terms of politics. There's the instabilities within the ruling government, there's the instability within the oppositions, and generally the political environment in Malaysia is very unstable. So the government came up with the idea to declare emergency proclamations, which grants unlimited power to the government. And it also grants power to government to enact laws without any public or political scrutiny, because the parliament is suspended and is still suspended until August. But it can be recalled back if the government decided they need to leave the emergency declaration. And of course, they came up with the fake news ordinance very recently, in two weeks ago. It's basically, they say the government is saying that it's to counter misinformation and things like that. But every Malaysian know the reason behind the fake news ordinance is also came on board. It's because they want to stop people being critical of the emergency proclamations and everything the government is doing, because it's not under any scrutiny. And of course, the repressive laws still in place, especially like Sedition Act and Communication and Multimedia Act being used very widely to counter critical views against government and everybody that involved in the power. But, because of COVID-19, the entire civil societies and political parties, especially from PSM, we have to take a break because there's a lot of SOP to follow, and there was a lot of concerns whether when we do something, whether people are going to be, going to come against us and to scold us if we do something during the COVID-19. But the break is over, and the break is over now. So there was a couple of demonstrations and protests that's been organized since March after the declaration of the emergency. And you can see some of the photos here that we also had a protest today at Parliament. The younger generation is calling for the 18-year-old young people to be vote. And you can see there are a lot of other protests was happening against the anti-fake news ordinance, and also solidarity vigil that was held for the people in Myanmar. What we can learn from the struggle for democracy in the region? In my opinion, change can be triggered from outside, but consolidation comes from within. I think we all can be very inspired by what's going on within the region, but I think the consolidation work has to come from the within in the countries. And we also can see the authoritarian governments are learning and directly undermining democracy. Everybody in the region learning from each other. The states are learning from each other on how they can come up with repressive laws, how they can be very oppressive towards people. So they're learning from each other, and we also need to learn from each other on how we can make it better, and our struggle can be more creative, our struggle can be more sustainable, and how we can think ahead of the governments, the states in this region. We learned that going back to norm means we are going back to what we have paused for a year. That means we are bringing back the burden that we had in 2020 together with what we had before 2020, and it's became even larger problems. So we need to fight for democracy. We have to consistently fight for workers' rights, human rights, equalities, and job security. And one of the main issues that are going on throughout global and the job security. We learned that people's movement are the only way that could make change. The public health crisis pandemic is a reminder that basic economic, social, and political rights need to be in place if we want to fight the pandemic. And it need to be in the place if you want to have a democracy. People in Thailand, Myanmar, Indonesia, for example, taught us that with or without pandemic, we will be on losing end if we don't fight to get the basic rights. What is to be done to overcome the challenges to the democracy? I think the only way, is do people's movement. There will be authoritarian backlash, but we need to be stronger, and we need to have a sustainable people's movement, and we need to build everyone and everybody from all walk of life to fight the backlash from the authoritarian government. We need to manage the uncertainty among people. We need to give confidence to people in our countries that, you know, the change is possible. We need to build that. What we have been done before, you know, what we've been doing now, we have to build that, and we need to get stronger. And we need to consolidate the marginalized. We need to consolidate the most affected communities in our countries. We need to strengthen the institutions and practice of democracy. This should happen in such a way that people can realize their expectation of democracy. So I think we also have a role to play to strengthen all the institutions and practice of democracy in our country. What are the prospects of developing a transnational solidarity in the regional among the left and progressive social movements? I have only two suggestions. We can talk about it later in our discussion, and I hope my other comrades from PSM would be able to contribute as well in this discussion. I think firstly, we need to ground our role in the world, in the region, in our respective country. We need to know our roles. We need to also know that our roles are changing, not just being a pressure group, not just being reacting, but we need to build a movement. We need to do more than what we are doing now. We need to put our stand very clearly on what we are doing, and we need to build the confidence among the people. And solidarity and come together on certain similar issues that will have impact across the region. I think it can be political, can be economic, can be social, but I think we need to have certain agenda, certain program to have it together. And I think we can build the solidarity together. So I'll stop here. We will build our solidarity together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nalini, our friend, our comrade from PSM, Malaysia. A very interesting and thought-provoking elaboration, and I'm sure we'll have questions for you and many others later on. Moving on. We're gonna hear from Rayhana from PLM from the Philippines. Rayhana, please, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Ikra, and to all my comrades and friends from the Philippines. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Welcome, and a warm welcome to comrades from the region, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and our solidarity friends from around the world. I would also like to start off by expressing on behalf of PLM and of course the comrades from the Philippines, our solidarity with the struggle in Myanmar, which has been an incredible thing for us to witness and be in solidarity with. And we are committed to continuing our solidarity with the struggle there, and of course, the struggle of all our comrades in the region as well. Well, Duterte is infamous in the region and internationally, and I want to start off by actually looking at what the Duterte phenomenon means or represents politically. Internationally, of course, Duterte is a political manifestation of the crisis of the capitalist system, the multiple and intersecting crises, economic, social, political, and of course, the underlying and all-encompassing environmental crisis. He also represents the symptoms of the political crisis of what we call liberal neoliberalism and the rise of authoritarianism, the far-right movements, the openly neo-fascist movements that are emerging and that have arisen around the world, from Brazil's Bolsonaro to Trumpism in the US, to Orbán in Hungary and India's Modi. So we have to see this in the context of developments internationally. Of course, in the Philippines, he is a product of what we have experienced post the collapse of the Marcos dictatorship, the failure of the post-Marcos elite democracy. Duterte represents a faction of the elite that has always been in existence in the Philippines for a long time. The local traditional politicians, what we call trapos, and warlords with private armies, The local political clans with large landholdings and businesses, including illegal businesses such as drugs, prostitution, trafficking, and so on. The semi-feudal vestiges, if you like, of Philippine society. This is his base. Initially in the city of Davao, which now has power nationwide. He governs like a godfather. People in cabinet and in lucrative government positions are his gang, which also explains the utter incompetence in government. He promotes and supports his cronies in big business. And this marks the character of the state itself, that the regime largely controls, and there is no major conflict between the Duterte regime and the key pillars of the state. His people are in the military, police, Congress, and even in the Supreme Court. Media, he has had a concerted major attack on the media in an attempt to control it. And hence you've got the autocratic and dictatorial character to this regime without it having to explicitly declare and directly declare martial law. Attacks on the media, ABS-CBN, one of the opposition, liberal opposition mouthpieces, has been closed, shut down, and of course you've heard of the attacks on the head of Rappler, Maria Teresa, who has been charged and is waiting trial. The other side of this characteristic and of the regime, but also of this trend internationally, is that it's extremely misogynistic. That is, it's based on a hatred of this incredible culture of hatred of women. And some of the first attacks were suffered by women in the opposition. And these are some of the major sort of highlights of these attacks, where women were forced out of public office and replaced. Women were charged on trumped-up charges. Women are constantly under attack with the most misogynistic comments by Duterte's trolls and so on. So there's this misogynistic character of this regime that really needs to be highlighted as well. The particular thing that I want to talk about is the war on democratic rights and human rights. Of course, Duterte has declared several wars, the war on drugs, the war on terror, and now the war on COVID. And all these are essentially code for war on working people and the poor. The war on terror is an internal war, a key program of the Duterte regime. And it's also code for a massive attack on the left and the progressive movements. And this is one of the generals, the lieutenant general of the Philippine military, on the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 that was passed last year, where he says, even with the COVID-19 pandemic, we will see to it that the implementation of this law will remain our top priority to place a definitive end to terrorism. This is, the internal situation that they're talking about. Of course, these wars, Duterte's wars, are all interrelated and interconnected into an overall program that represents the interests of the Duterte faction and its bid to cling to power. The war on working people and the poor align with the overall class interests of the elite and the regime. And because of this, Duterte has managed to build a level of consensus with support from some big sections of capital, such as San Miguel, people like Ramon Ang, who own San Miguel. The extrajudicial killings, I should point out, as a combination of these wars, are estimated to be around 27,000. Now, I want to quickly go into this anti-terrorism law of 2020, or Republic Act 11479. And this is one of the rallies that have been held. I think this was outside the Supreme Court by I Defend, one of the foremost and leading human rights organizations in the country today. The act, the definition of terrorism is vague and broad and covers legitimate dissent or protest. Free speech utterances, publications, ideas, emblems, banners, religious freedom, where religious organizations are tagged as terrorist, freedom of association, the whole lot. Mere intention has been criminalized. The period of surveillance has been extended from 30 to 90 days. An anti-terrorism council has been set up with wide powers where a suspected terrorist can be detained on the mere authorization of the anti-terrorism council. And this act violates a number of existing acts and provisions of the Philippine Constitution. The CPP-NPA is designated as a terrorist organization, and the Anti-Money Laundering Council was ordered to freeze their bank accounts. A number of other organizations, progressive organizations, have been red tagged. NGOs, human rights organizations such as PARA, nuns, church people, Oxfam, Save the Children, Caritas, Bread for the World, lawyers. Lawyers have been a particular target. 61 lawyers have been killed under Duterte, the regime, more than the entire period of the previous 6 administrations, that is over a 44-year period. And so much so that the Supreme Court has recently come out and condemned the killings of lawyers and the harassment of lawyers and judges and so on. But frankly, this is too little, too late. And the purpose is to intimidate, spread fear, and destabilize. These are some of the faces, faces to this red tagging and killing of activists. Randall Echanes, chair of Anak Pawis, that used to have reps in Congress. He's also a representative in the peace talks of the National Democratic Front. There was a military, he was killed in Metro Manila, a military operation in his household where he was tortured and killed. And then there were human rights activists, workers who were killed. This one, Zara Alvarez, in broad daylight on the streets in, I think, Bicol, this was. On Human Rights Day, there were arrests of activists and unionists. This was essentially to interfere and block the protests, and they have now been released. Now, PARA and the Task Force Detainees of the Philippines has put together this list of the nature of violations, a number of incidents, a number of victims, and so on. And this is for people's information. And this is since the anti-terror law, there has been an escalation and an increase in the trend. And this is for the period July to December 10, 2020. Part of the resistance to this has been a series of petitions that have been taken to the Supreme Court by the progressive movement, by the people's organizations, by the left, by the human rights organizations, and so on. And every time these petitions have been heard at the Supreme Court, there have been actions and mobilizations outside the Supreme Court. Well, the resistance, and here I want to quickly look at the question of the mass movement. The support of the massa for Duterte is still significant, but it is weak. It has weakened and is waning. And part of the problem here is that there has been no clear alternative has been provided to this regime. The liberal opposition was significantly weakened to the point of being unable and unwilling to mount a clear and consistent opposition to Duterte. It's the mass movement that has been in the front of the resistance against Duterte. And this is the labor, women, youth and students, urban poor, human rights organizations, the left, progressive individuals and activists. The youth resistance needs a special mention here because there was sort of a spontaneous movement here, and they were the first to break the climate of fear imposed by the pandemic last year, the military-led lockdown and so on, especially amongst the students. And they were the first to hold some of the first physical rallies on the grounds of the University of the Philippines, and also the Commission on Human Rights grounds, which is close to the University of the Philippines. There were attempts to call a student strike and so on because of the government's handling of the pandemic and its impact on the education sector and the students. But this was hard to do in conditions where the universities were, there weren't face-to-face classes. And there have been various attempts at undermining the independence of the universities, especially the universities of the Philippines. There have been agreements where police and military were prohibited to invade academic space, that is to actually go into those universities, but this has been recently unilaterally revoked. And these are some of the actions that have taken place around this at the universities and some of the barricades that were put up as well. Labor and women's movement has also been very much a part of this resistance. On Bonifacio Day, which is a National Heroes Day last year, November 30, there were large labor rallies. And on March 8th, on International Women's Day, there were large women's rallies as well. And I've just got some pictures up there. Of course, it is difficult in holding huge and continuing mobilizations, partly because the level of the spontaneous struggle is still low and developing. The pandemic and the government's military-led response in handling the pandemic, and also the division of the left and the progressive movement, the lack of unity. These have been some of the factors that have been a problem in mobilizing on a larger scale. 2022 elections are coming up. I won't go into that because I'm running out of time. Of course, finally, the way forward, which is, I sort of want to outline here the character of the struggle that we're pursuing. The main aim is to get rid of the Duterte regime. The mass movement needs to develop its capacity through mass struggles and mobilizations to oust the regime. We need a united front from below, which is our strategic orientation. That is the unity of the masses in struggle, a united front from below. But we are also open to a united front from above, where we'll have to deal with various forces of the elite. But this is more of a tactical alliance for us. And this could take the form of an electoral alliance, which is the issue that is also being discussed now. Duterte is a product of elite democracy, the worst form of elite democracy under Duterte. But therefore, we reject going back to business as usual neoliberal liberalism. And we need to strengthen the ranks of the left and develop and struggle for a socialist alternative. So what is this? Why a socialist alternative and democracy? Why are we discussing this when we're talking about democracy? And I want to conclude by looking at this quote of Karl Marx from the Manifesto in 1848, where he said that one of a necessary task is for us to win the battle for democracy. And here we're talking about a substantial democracy, not some limited parliamentary democracy, if you like, in which the working class and the poor are raised to the position of ruling class as a necessary step to sweep away the old society and to create a new one where the free, in which the free development of each is a condition for the free development of all. And I think in that, Marx sort of characterized the kind of democracy and the role that democracy plays in our overall struggle and in the struggle for socialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rayhana, our comrade from PLM in the Philippines. A very insightful analysis of the Philippines, of the situation in the Philippines, especially with the rise of Duterte and his authoritarian capitalist rule and resistance against it. I'm sure we'll have so many questions for you as well. which and we'll go back to you in the Q&A session. Moving on, I would like to pass the baton to Cham, our comrade from Thailand, from the Workers' Union and the Union of Creatives and Cultural Workers, and he'll give us a talk. He'll share the latest situation in Thailand. So, Cham, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Chachai Pumpuang from the Worker Union in Thailand. You can call me Cham. Let's start with the crisis of wealth. In the world, as we know, the 1% of the richest people in the world have more than 50% of wealth compared to the rest of us that have some or nothing. The point of this weakness is the 99% of people were deceived by the culture of capitalism to separate us from each other, from the truth that we are all the same side. 99% work, 1% take. The solution is we need to unionize not just only in our workplace or country, but continent. Okay, let's talk about our fight for democracy in Thailand last year. But first, we have to understand the context of the political field. In the last 10 years, the democracy movement is fighting for free speech, for the right to choose our government, and some social issues. We had never talked about democracy at workplace before. In my opinion, this is so important. If we fight for democracy, but we shut democracy down when we go to work, it's dangerous for our quality of life. Thailand is proof of my argument because Thailand's wealth inequality is the highest in the world. Because they are the same, let me explain it. At the beginning of the new democracy movement, right now, began after the Constitution Court dissolved the Progressive Party, the Future Party Forward, or Thai people call them Anakot Mai. Then the protest began. We choose the black color to unite the people when we go to protest. Black against yellow, the loyal color. What about the content and demand of the people? First, we talk about sack the dictator government General Prayut Chan-o-cha and the gang. Second, we talk about new constitution by people. And the last one is the climax of the new age. We demand the monarchy to reform. If you live in Thailand or listen to some news from here, you will know that our monarchy is so powerful and popular by using one-side propaganda for 6 decades. So many people love them and protect them and make them are the richest monarchs in the world. If you criticize them, you will go to jail. In many progressive people's opinion said, there is a center of a problem for our democracy. But in the last 10 years, the wind of change come to Thailand. The internet gave us the change from web board to social media. We have achieved our free speed day by day, then year by year. We will talk about it only on internet, but now we are talking about it on the street and in the public space. The student and the new generation, they are all pro-democracy and fight for progressive social issue like sex equality, LGBTQ+, feminist, religion diversity, and a lot of them are no religion, less diversity, free public healthcare for all, and some pro-welfare state. All of these I define and call it in Thailand. Social progressive movement. It's great for our democracy, but it's not enough. We have three demands to the dictator government. First, we demand General Prayut Chan-o-cha and the gang to get out. Second, we demand new constitution by the people. Third, we demand the monarchy to reform. But it's not enough, because three demands make us just democratic, normal, standard country. We should get it a long time ago when the People's Party, or Thai people call them Khana Rasadon, did the revolution in 1932, or when we have the first constitution by the people in 1997. We are all losing too much time. We need more just normal democracy, that we can choose our government every 4 years and free speech. We need democracy in the workplace. We need democracy in an economic system. We need a better quality of living. We need a fair living wage. Now, we have the social progressive movement. Then we also need the economic progressive movement too. Last year, we Thai people only win the cultural war, not the power war. If we want to win the power war, we need to organize our movement by building the organization by the people, like the General Union. If we have a strong General Union, we will call for general strike and have a chance to win the power war, to end the dictatorship regime. And General Union will protect our democracy. General Union is the weapon for people to fight with the dictatorship. No matter what with dictatorship, the state or the capital. Malcolm X said, "We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized." But first, we have to fight the culture of capitalism. We need to tell the truth and the fact that we are all the same team. And we are all the most important people of the country and the world. So people thought they have a chance to get rich. But the truth is, you can't get rich while your salary is just $600 a month, and your boss gets $6,000 a month from your work, and your boss can't do $6,000 a month on their own. The system collapses us. Tomorrow, only 1% to get all. The 1% can stop working for years, and the rest of their life if they want. And the society going well, but the 99% can't stop working. If we stop, the world is going to collapse. Jeff Bezos didn't build the Amazon on their own. We did. Steve Jobs didn't build the iPhone on their own. We did. Elon Musk didn't build the Tesla on their own. We did. The 1% didn't build the world. We did. Now we know who are the most important people in the world, but we are undermined by capitalist culture. We have to replace them with democratic culture. For example, in Germany, they have democracy in the workplace. If the corporate has employee more than 2,000 people, 40% of the executive board need to elected by the employee. Or in Northern Europe, some countries have a union membership rate of 60% of the population. That's why they have a welfare state. Compared to Thailand, we have only 1.6%. That is the lowest union membership rate in the world. This is the reason why Thailand's wealth inequality is the highest in the world. The only way to get there is to unite the people by general union. Then we could get our will back and build our democracy in the economic system. If we succeed, we will get a better life for ourselves and for the generation to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chem, for your talk about the state of democracy in Thailand and the struggle for unionization and for democratic rights and the work that you do with the unions and a bunch of other progressive social movements in Thailand. We have Debbie, who will give us some updates about the human rights situation in Burma, especially in light of the recent military coup and brutal repression against protesters and citizens in Burma. So Debbie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ikra. Hello, everyone, including people who got up really early in California and the people in Sydney who are staying up really late. I'm just going to share 2 slides and talk a little bit about some of these issues. I think if you were hiding under a rock, you would not have heard about the coup by the Burmese military on 1st of February, but I'm assuming that you were not hiding under a rock, that the military took a leaf out of Donald Trump's book and went on an allegation that the National League for Democracy, which won the November 2020 elections by a landslide, had committed electoral fraud. The difference between them and Donald Trump was they actually had an army of 500,000 soldiers, well armed by China and Russia and other countries, to arrest all the elected MPs and prevent them from entering parliament. What we are seeing in terms of the violence that's happening on our screens is the attempt by a junta that violated its own constitution by illegally declaring a state of emergency and installing itself as an illegal regime, trying to gain control over the country. We are seeing a coup in progress. And what we've seen is millions of people in 95% of the country protesting, sometimes almost in some places every day, and the military and being joined by civil servants and strikers from the private sector. In fact, the military tried to arrest bank workers to try and force them back to go to work because the banking system was in collapse. So this military has already, between 1st of February and yesterday, the junta launched 200 attacks on unarmed civilians protesting the coup, killing 328, including many children, and injuring hundreds. They've arrested more than 3,000 politicians, activists, labor organizers, workers, journalists, and others. Today, March 27th, is Armed Forces Day. And the military celebrated Armed Forces Day by launching a nationwide crackdown, which has turned many cities into urban war zones. They have killed between 50, that's what the conservative amount that everyone is agreeing on, but probably closer to 80 people just in one day today throughout the country. We also have to understand that in all of these crackdowns since 1st of February, it was poor neighborhoods, villages, and industrial zones which were hit the hardest by lethal violence. We're talking about the industrial zones of Langtaya, which is west across the river of Yangon, Sri Pita, South Dagon, and North Okalapa. North Okalapa is one of the poorer neighborhoods in Rangoon, and it is host to the city's only crematorium. This was where people were killed, and this is where we saw a lot of people killed, even though they were surrendering or running away. In the Langtaya industrial zone, for example, on the 16th of March, workers at a shoe factory had gathered to demand their wages, and the manager of the factory called the police. When the police came, they slapped the young woman who was leading the strike, and by almost in reflex, she slapped the policeman back, and he executed her on the spot in front of her workplace. And the security forces then opened fire and killed 5 of her other colleagues and arrested 70. So this is the kind of brutality that's become very, very normal. However, in the more affluent neighborhoods, the military then goes on a sweep, like a dragnet, to try and round up activists, but they haven't really fired weapons indiscriminately as they have done in the poorer neighborhoods. What we also have to understand, in addition to this 200 attacks in the urban areas on unarmed civilians protesting the junta, is that between February the 1st and March the 12th, there were also another 72 armed clashes and attacks targeting civilians in ethnic and indigenous areas related to conflicts that were ongoing before the coup happened. And in that short time, 20 people died and at least 3,000 civilians were displaced. In this picture, we also see that on the 17th of March, the military declared many areas, a lot of them industrial zones and working class neighborhoods, and especially in Rangoon, they declared martial law. And they also declared the death penalty. They imposed the death penalty for such crimes as treason, dissent, obstruction of the military. So if you was trying to stop a military truck from progressing into a neighborhood, you could be sentenced to death, and also false news. So on March the 8th, International Women's Day, many women took advantage of the superstition that the Orthodox Buddhist men would lose their spiritual purity if they were to be touched or walked under a woman's sarong, a tamang. So what many neighborhoods did was they strung up clotheslines across the street and hung women's sarongs, tamangs, across the street. And that meant that the military trucks had to stop and get a junior officer to pull down the clothesline before it could proceed. And this actually slowed down military and police trucks from when they were entering into civilian neighborhoods. And it was no surprise that less than 10 days later, the military then imposed a death penalty for obstructing the military. All of these things didn't happen overnight. This situation did not happen overnight. What we saw is that as everyone was heralding and having orgasms over the amazing growth of the economy in this nominally civilian government since 2011, they politely overlooked the fact that there was a rise of military attacks on civilian communities, so that these attacks rose by 143% within 9 years of this so-called liberalization of the economy. And that rise correlates with the 180% increase in the military budget. And the military was actually the main beneficiary of the economic liberalization, because companies, military corporations like Myanmar Economic Corporation, Myanmar Economic Holdings, they actually paid dividends of millions of dollars directly to their owners, which were military officers and military units. For example, Light Infantry Division 33 and Light Infantry Division 99, both notorious for committing atrocity crimes against the Rohingya during their genocidal campaign in 2017, has actually received millions of dollars in dividends from Myanmar Economic Corporation in recent years. And that genocidal campaign also resulted in the clearing of land for natural resource exploitation and mega development projects, which benefited these military companies. So that is the ultimate example of a military that embraces capitalism and is motivated by capitalism to commit atrocity crimes. What has happened in these past few weeks? Firstly, the movement pushed back hard on international financial institutions. As a result, international financial institutions, which had an estimated $11 billion in project financing and loans to Burma, were forced to suspend their disbursements. Sanctions. We had been working very hard on sanctions targeting these military companies, including MEC, MEL, and also MOGE, the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise, another state-owned enterprise that's military controlled. And finally, the UK and the US imposed sanctions on MEC and MEL last week, just a couple of days ago. The civil disobedience movement, which has taken a beating because senior public servants to the rank of Director General and the UN Permanent Representative for Myanmar, who've joined the civil disobedience movement and turned their back on the military, has been just nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. If the civil disobedience movement wins the Nobel Peace Prize in December, it will win the prize exactly 30 years after Aung San Suu Kyi won the prize, for similar struggles, but hopefully different principles. The elected members of parliament who were prevented from entering the parliament and later pushed into house arrest found a way. They used Zoom to swear themselves in and convene a parliamentary session, which is ironic given that the state of emergency in Malaysia has suspended parliamentary proceedings under the guise of COVID. So obviously, Malaysia, which is far more economically and technologically advanced, somehow can't organize itself to conduct parliamentary proceedings on Zoom. But the committee representing the National Parliament of Myanmar, representing 76% of elected MPs, can actually circumvent internet restrictions in order to do their business while they are being hunted down by the military junta. So that's food for thought. My final slide here is to tell you where you can get more information. We have the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, AAPP.org. It provides a daily briefing, a wrap-up for what happened that day. And at the end of each bit, if you go to the bottom of the page of each daily briefing, there's a you can download a list of detainees, including details of their detention, and also a list of people killed, including details about what were the circumstances and who they were. Justice for Myanmar, which is justiceformyanmar.org, maps the economic interests and partnerships of the military and their families. This is quite important if we're actually going to go after them, because the economic incentive is something that is overlooked when we consider what the military is doing now. Progressive Voice, progressivevoicemyanmar.org, posts daily announcements from the movement and an overview when they can. ALTSEAN, my organization, altsean.org, ALTSEAN.org, has a Coup Watch feature, and we provide a monthly summary and thematic trackers looking at issues of human rights crackdown, on what the civil disobedience movement has been doing, what the military has been doing, etc., what the international community has been doing, and what the business community has been doing. So I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to answering your questions. One point, the question of, is it possible to have a transnational alliance? Yes, it's already happening. This is why we are all here. The Milk Tea Alliance, which is often quoted, it sees a connection between China, between Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand, hopefully Malaysia, and Burma, and also Indonesia. So I think it's quite important to acknowledge that that movement is happening at different levels in terms of different demographics. There's the oldies, the socialists, the young people who don't want to subscribe to any ideology. All of us are intersecting and overlapping, and I think we need to keep that diversity and inclusivity going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, our friend and comrade from the Alternative ASEAN Network on Burma, for very important updates about the on-the-ground situation in Burma, which is really worrying and which obviously deserves international solidarity and support from us and other people around the world and across the region. And last but not least is our friend and speaker from Indonesia, Ridho, will give us some updates about situation in Indonesia regarding the handling of the COVID pandemic, as well as the recent protests against the deepening of neoliberalization in Indonesia and government crackdown against the protest movement. So Ridho from the Working People's Party, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ikra, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Rido. I'm from Movement People Party. So today I want to talk a bit about the situation, the political situation in Indonesia, and how we can encourage more solidarities, more resistance against the so-called neoliberal capitalism. And first of all, it is important for us to understand what happens in Indonesia right now. So as we all know, Indonesia right now has been ruled by this president named Jokowi, right? And the situation, the reason why he can become the president is quite similar to what happens in other places, particularly like in the Philippines, where the elitist, or in our case, we call it as an oligarchic democracy, has failed to deliver its promise, particularly to provide necessary decent life for the people. And Jokowi, prior 2014, has become a representation, a new model, a new politician that for many people seen as a figure that can deliver more democracy, more redistributive economy, and more just Indonesia. So that's why, although some oligarchic force, particularly the big business, has backed Jokowi in a let's say in an initial phase of his candidacy, there are several members of or several forces from the progressive movement and also backed Jokowi in order to get the chair of the presidency. So in an initial phase, we can say that there was a struggle between the progressive force and also against the old force in influencing the direction of Jokowi's power. But unfortunately, when Jokowi successfully got his grip in the presidential palace, the situation changed a lot, because the problem is, in order to accommodate the demand of the masses and also the demand of the oligarchic power, Jokowi decided to play a middle ground politics. So that's why in his first year as a president, he tried to accommodate some segment of the progressive group, but also he decided to accommodate some figure from the oligarchic force. So that's why in an initial year, Jokowi has problem into how to balance this relative power of force. So, and this situation provide an opportunity, particularly for some old force, the oligarchic figure, to let's say exploit the situation, because this middle ground politics becomes a pretext for particularly for the many people that believe that Jokowi will deliver necessary change. They start to become disillusioned with the Jokowi, and they start to grow a big satisfaction against Jokowi. And this situation provide opportunity for some figure from the oligarchy to capitalize this dissatisfaction and then channel it into their own interest. So that's why we have a movement called 212 movement in 2016, which basically a really strong dissatisfaction of the people that coming from the people itself, but unfortunately being channeled by the this called Islamic movement, which basically in Indonesia, they always have strong relationship with the oligarchic forces. So that's why the situation forced Jokowi to take a strong response. He decided to strengthen the grip of the military and the police due to this escalation of conflict. And this particular situation not only makes Jokowi to strengthen his authoritarian power, but also it makes him more aligned to the interests of the old oligarchic forces. And gradually, Jokowi, particularly after in his second period, Jokowi become more and more aligned to the interests of the oligarchy. And why is that? Because although the people start to dissatisfy with Jokowi's rule, the people has no instrument to propagate, to promote their interests against the formal political power like the presidency. So that's why without any strong instrument, without any clear political organization, there's no way from the mass people try to enforce Jokowi to be more accommodative to the interests of the people. So here we are right now in the situation where as the consequence of the so-called social conflict between the people and the elite, oligarchic elite, we have an authoritarian Jokowi with a strong bend towards oligarchic interests, in which something that already happened before, but in the case of Jokowi, the situation is quite tragic because previously some segment of the progressive movement become part of the Jokowi himself. So that's why in current situation under Jokowi's presidency, even within his cabinet, there are some member of the social movement that become part of the regime itself. And for us, it tells something about the difficulties of the social movement in Indonesia, about how to promote the fundamental change, but at the same time, this situation has to happen under the pretext of the weak and under the pretext of the weak political organization of the social movement itself. And while Jokowi aim to, let's say, to exert his power as a president, since he became part of the oligarchic force, he started to promote many policy that be considered as an unpopular. In 2018, he decided to weaken the anti-corruption organization, a really popular anti-corruption organization in Indonesia called KPK, Komisi Pemberantasan Korupsi. It means that Corruption Eradication Commission, which is a state organization that's responsible to eradicate corruption act in Indonesia. And this decision create enormous response from the social movement in Indonesia, which basically expose the oligarchic interests of Jokowi to strengthen the position of the big business, of the old forces, and even let's say the legacy of the authoritarian new order authoritarian regime, and the height of the let's say the treachery of Jokowi occurred in 2020 when he decides to promote this omnibus law rule, which basically undermine all of the social economic regulation that can shield the working people, the environment, and even the women from the arbitrariness of the powerful actor in Indonesia, which then create massive mobilization from the social movement itself. So that's why in 2020 we have so many resistance against the bill from many places in Indonesia. And this oligarchic tendency of Jokowi getting stronger in the context of COVID-19, when in the midst of the pandemic, the government has decided to prioritize the economy rather than life of the people. And as we can see right now in Indonesia, although we have this so-called soft lockdown in Indonesia, but this policy is really inconsistent, and also this makes some big confused among the people, and that's why Indonesia become the level of infection in Indonesia is really high, and that's the reason why many people have died in Indonesia, because the government not willing to provide a necessary protection to their own people. And the situation getting worse because this prioritization of the economy makes, and also combined with the implementation of omnibus law, makes the big business, the capitalist, the employer, have more power to do whatever they want. And we have many cases in which the worker has been arbitrarily let off by the employer just because they just thought that the business is not really good, and they decide to rationalize their own accounting. And one of the factor that can be rationalized definitely are the worker, because the worker are the one that can be easily dismissed by the business. And yeah, we have this situation right now in Indonesia under Jokowi, a figure that used to be, let's say, can be influenced by the social movement, but then once he was in power, he became part of the oligarchic forces. But that's the sad story. But also we have important and good story in political dynamic in Indonesia, because due to this Jokowi act, the people started to see that they have to do something. And we got a strong mobilization in 2019 and 2020. And I think that's really a good point for us, because the people started to see that the real change can only happen if they come together and started to point out that political power is their problem that needs to be solved. And this opened up many possibilities, particularly among the social movement in Indonesia, about how to move forward, because the Jokowi case, and also the Jokowi case provide a good example for them, because they thought that what we know as a strong ever-present of the oligarchic forces is not really that strong. And if we are able to organize ourselves, there's some chance for the oligarchic force to be defeated. But this is also a challenge for us, because up until now, we still don't have any clear answer about how to unionize ourselves in a more political program. So the challenge right now becomes our future, about how to ensure that all of this resistance movement that coming from the progressive movement can come together. And right now there are some development among the progressive force in Indonesia. They start to organize themselves as a political parties. Like recently, the Green Party of Indonesia has declared themselves as let's say, a formal political party, and and also there are some element from the PRD, the old left-wing parties that coming from that used to be important part in resisting the authoritarian New Order politics of Suharto. They decide to create a new party. Yeah, and that's for me, it's quite interesting, because we finally have some sort of tentative answer about how to organize ourselves into political process. And this speaks a lot about how we can organize ourselves at international level, because one thing for sure that we seen to what happens in Myanmar, to what happens in Philippines, in Indonesia, and other places, is the reason why the state can effectively destroy the democratic achievement is because in all of these places, the leftist force, the left party, had been unable to become a significant force. And I think one thing that we need to start to talk about is how we can be more political in our initiative, particularly about how we can make more conversation about electoral engagement in our own situation, and also this is for me is quite
Time's up, Comrade Rido.
Yeah, thank you, Ikra. So that would be my view. The way I think we need to address right now is about how to make our movement more substantially politicized and also more engaged in electoral arena. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rido, our friend or comrade from the Working People's Party in Indonesia, for your elaboration about the rise of Jokowi and his regime and his capitulation to oligarchic interests, and the ongoing and growing resistance against him in the last couple of years, especially in light of the deepening of oligarchic forces in the economy as well as in politics.
My name is Giles Jai Unpakorn from Thailand, but I'm in exile in Britain. Unfortunately, the Thai movement is at a dead end, and it's starting to weaken, and that's why all the leaders of the movement are facing lèse-majesté charges from the military. I think in Thailand we need to learn from two lessons really. First of all, from Burma, the importance of organizing general strikes when campaigning and fighting for democracy against the military junta. But the second lesson is something that we should learn from the PSM in Malaysia, the PLM in the Philippines, and the new party foundations formations in Indonesia. And that is that we need in Thailand a revolutionary socialist party to intervene in the movement. Setting up a general union to build a general strike sometime in the future, when there are already many unions existing on the ground in Thailand, is in my view an anarcho-syndicalist utopian dream. We need socialist activists to agitate within existing unions to build for strikes now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you, comrades. I'm in Oakland. I do the blog site oaklandsocialist.com. My first question is for Debbie. And you were talking about the integration of the military with various capitalist enterprises and how the profits are then taken into the military. My question is, to what extent are those profits shared with the rank and file of the military? Or is it just purely skimmed off from the top? Or anyway, that's my first question. My second is a more general one, and that is, it seems to me that the tendency towards extreme nationalism and racism and autocracy is a symptom of the crisis of capitalism itself. And so in what way can, it seems to me then that it's necessary then to integrate the struggle against, or in favor of democracy, the struggle against this repression with a struggle for socialism, for the downfall of capitalism entirely. And I'd like to hear the other speakers comment on that and how they see that integration.
Okay. I'm sorry. I haven't hear all the question, but in Thailand we have a problem about people. They does not define themselves as a labor or worker. This is a big cultural problem here. That's why we can't form a national union or general union. And that's why we have a lowest rate membership here in Thailand. And the capitalism culture is go well here.
Good question, John. It appears that a lot of the dividends, the revenue, the payments actually go to the leaders of the different units and divisions. So I've had long chats with defectors, including defector at the even as the high level of as a rank of major, and basically where he said that in order to make the money as a military person, you needed to be able to run the businesses or do the business deals or the errands, the business errands of your commanding officer. So as a major, he needed to listen to the colonel or the head of his unit, and he wasn't interested in that because he thought that he's an old-fashioned soldier. He just wants to take care of the security of the country and follow orders, and he saw being involved in business as corrupt. So we could already start to see that if you want to progress in the military, a lot of people join the military because they saw it as an opportunity to make money. But in order to do that, you really have to do a lot of extra work and be willing to do the business errands of the officers at the top of your unit, so that they will give you part of the profits that they have gained from their ill deeds. So that's something to be aware of. So the rank and file, the soldiers lower down the ground do all the dirty work, commit the atrocity crimes at the command of their officers, but they don't get anything else in return. Thank you.
We have 2 other questions, but before that, I'd like to just briefly highlight several important takeaway points that our speakers shared in our presentations. I think there are a couple of points here. First is the fragmentation of social movements, as well as the left across countries in this region, and authoritarian consolidations of the ruling classes. And as a result of that, we witness this authoritarian phase of capitalism, which has never been democratic, and they're learning from each other really quickly. And the question is how to sack these elites from power, and how to build power and take power, and how to offer a viable program for the working people. So those are several questions that I think our speakers have highlighted in one way or another as well. Now we have let's see, we have a couple of questions here. Some of the questions are overlapping, so I will try to sort of combine them. First questions is from Naresh Kumar Rao. How can activists in Southeast Asia work together and cooperate to build worker power across national borders? So that's the first questions. And there's another questions on China's role in supporting the military in Myanmar and Thailand, but I'll leave it for later, and I will ask our speakers from Thailand and Debbie to comment on that. But we have a number of questions regarding parties and social movements and strategies to build power, right? So we have Comrades Kumar and Daru, for example, asked whether, for example, should each country have a revolutionary socialist? Should each country have a revolutionary socialist party first before doing regional coalition building? And Daru asks a very important questions. One of the problems of the left is the fragmentation and infighting amongst the left. Is there any way to overcome this? So altogether, we have from these 3 friends, we have questions about how to build alliances across borders, and how to build how to resolve infighting among progressive forces among the left, and how to build a revolutionary party. So I think I will ask some other speakers to comment on that as well.
Thank you, Akra. I think I just want to take on the question that was asked. Let me just check. One of the problem of the left in fighting among how to overcome this. I think if everyone in the struggle, when we understand and that whatever that we do to pursue justice or truth or human rights, we have to understand it has to be collective. It has to be a collective solidarity with others. And at the end of the day, all the work that we do on the ground with the workers, with the people for calling for truth, justice, human rights, and socialism, it's not for our own pleasure, but the dignity of the workers and people that we stand in solidarity with. So if we remember that, and remind ourselves all the time, so we have to keep thinking about that rather than fighting among ourselves. I think fighting among ourselves for certain strategies or tactics and principles, it's okay. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that whenever we want to fight, whenever we want to having these issues or conflicts, we have to bring back our thoughts to who we are and who we are standing with, and why we actually all became left, or why we are doing this, and why we decided to have to be different from others. And I think we have to remember that in ourselves, and I think that would lead us to be more collaborative. We can have differences in our opinion, but we should stand together when in our movement towards to build the left together, or the socialism, or people's movement together. I think that is one thing. And whether the questions on whether we need to have like Revolutionary Socialist Party, and things like that, I think it comes from the context of each country. You see the context, your political situation, in what is the best for the people, and it should come from within the country. It shouldn't be like, we're not suggesting here you should have this and you go and do it. It's not something that you impose from what we are discussing here. It's something that should come from the within of the country. And if you feel that we can have a socialist party, we can have a left party, and things like that, it should come from the country. And if you think that you need something to learn from others, then I think we are here to consolidate that information together, and how we can learn from each other. I think that should come from within, in my opinion. I think I'll let other speakers respond.
Thanks, Nalini. I actually do agree with a lot of the points that Nalini made. The questions that comrades have posed, I mean, these are very, very important questions. And I think there are no straightforward answers or solutions to this. I think these are questions that we're really, when we talk about the struggle, it's also very much the struggle is to address some of these questions in the context that we face in our national contexts. The question of, I raised the importance of left unity, and various other speakers have also touched on this. I think sectarianism is a major problem in among socialist parties and in the socialist movement, and certainly it's a really important question and a major issue in the Philippine left. And this is not to say that we don't have differences, or that we shouldn't have differences, or that we shouldn't respect each other's differences. Of course, we have differences, and these differences are legitimate. These are partly historical, partly ideological even, partly political in terms of strategy and tactics. And when I talk about tactics, I don't mean little things. I mean, key questions of strategy and key major tactical questions, and so on. So yes, the left will have differences. The socialist movement will have differences. That's inevitable. But I think the problem I'm talking about is not so much that, but this sort of the inability to be able to discuss and work through these differences and come to a point of unity in struggle. Unity around a platform or of struggle, and instead these differences turn into, a bitter factionalism and organizational, very bitter organizational sectarianism. Absolutely, this is a problem in the socialist movement. It's a problem for the left, and it's something that in the Philippines we have to struggle with on a daily basis. And this brings back to the point that Nalini was making, that is to step aside and look at the bigger picture, and that is the unity of the working class struggle. How these differences and sectarianism of the left actually undermines the unity of the working class struggle and the struggle of working people and the poor, and that is the real problem. And we have to remind ourselves that it's working people and the poor, the majority, that will be the force for fundamental change, for revolutionary change, for the building of socialism, and that needs to be, foremost in our mind in terms of how we handle ourselves in the course of this struggle. And I think this is part of the problem related to what Giles was raising. Yes, there is a need for a revolutionary socialist party, but certainly in the Philippines, the legacy here is very problematic, and part of developing a more united revolutionary socialist party or political center has to deal with these problematic legacies. And that is, frankly, a day-to-day struggle. I'll leave it at that.
I completely agree with Nalini and Rihanna in here, because context matter. And one thing that I think become not only necessary, but also sufficient for our cause to overcome all of our problem is to take power. And these things, I've been inspired by our comrade in Latin America about how when Chavez take power in 1999, it created a leftist wave among the region. It provided opportunity for Lula in 2002, for Korea, for Morales to take power. And I think that can be important reference for us if we want to address our limitation. The thing is, we have to start ourselves. We have to transform ourselves as a political organization. I mean, and as a political organization, the aim is the politics. And unfortunately for us, many of us from the left still unable to deal the question of power. And this particular reason become the main factor for us why we started to feel, let's say, powerless against the state, because we never become the part of the political struggle. And that's why I think, and to address Daru and also Arul question, all of these things that we want to emphasize in here is to how to concentrate and accumulate our political program to help each of its organization in its context, in its country, to help taking power. And within our context, we have to admit that the challenge right now is electoral politics, and it has its own logic, it has its own structure, it has its own, let's say, organization, and yeah, that's that specificity. And I think we need to be more open to have debate about, although we have differences, we rarely touch into that question about how each of us can address our own problem in the context of taking power in the situation of electoral politics. Thanks.
Thank you, Ikra. Tukijo from Indonesia, actually, from organization ABRI organization, actually. So my question is that we all know since long, actually, the Western imperialists has a grounding in Southeast Asia, and even Southeast Asia itself has been the bulwark against socialism and communism. So, and imperialists also having their lackeys in many Southeast Asian countries, putting sort of Bonapartist ruler, etc. So how do you guys see in today's issue the imperialist interests intertwined in Southeast Asia? Since from the most apparent, in my view, let's say in Myanmar, where the imperialist has both feet in the chaos, first on the junta that already said to align with the West, And the second is that some of the liberal protesters in Myanmar itself, they put the banner asking for US intervention in there. So, and we also see that lately the Western imperialists, including Australia, has already preparing their war drive in South China Sea, which is like a crusade against China, let's say, to choke their economy. So we also see in Myanmar as well, there are some burning of destroying the project that already in cooperation between Myanmar and China to boost the productive forces in Myanmar, such as the new port in Rakhine with its pipeline, and also many of the factory there. So it seems that the project's been disbanded, and many of some factories itself get burned by some protester, or maybe the junta itself. I'm not sure. So yeah, how do you guys see about the imperialist interest in there? Thank you.
Okay, great.
Hi,
Thank you
Gerald,
very much.
please. Yeah.
Hi, here in California. John Ryman and I are longtime comrades, have worked together in many different issues and been involved in socialist organizations together. I've got several things. I guess I'll start with Burma. I've been following the events there, mostly on Al Jazeera. I'm really glad to have other sources of information, and thank you very much for those, Debbie. I saw a photo of some young garment workers, some young women that were holding up a sign calling for, I would say, solidarity on other, garment companies. I, don't remember the names of them. And it really struck me because they weren't calling for or asking for international solidarity from workers, but rather from corporations. And this is the sort of, this is one of the big international problems we have, is that there is no push and no advocacy that I can see for solidarity, international solidarity amongst workers. And here in the United States, the reason for that is very clear. It's because the union leaders do not advocate for that, nor do they want that. But we know that we need that. So that's a question that I'll ask specifically to Debbie about the organization and leadership of the unions in Burma. And how is it that these young women were holding those signs rather than calling on workers, garment workers around the world to support them? That's one issue. I want to talk about Ken in the chat box and the question of infighting on the left. My experience here in the United States is that often the real political differences between organizations, especially socialist organizations, are actually hidden, and they are not debated openly in a way that would clarify those differences to workers, which is where it really matters, to clarify them amongst ourselves and the left, but especially amongst the working class, because from the outside and often from the inside, it just looks like a mess of dishonesty, to tell you the truth. So that's something that we've advocated for here. And I would advocate, just suggest to comrades that that's what needs to happen to clarify these differences, is that it has to be an open and honest political debate. Very difficult to accomplish that, but that's what needs to happen. John raised a question about the military. And if you study history, we all know from the history of failed revolutions that without the working class having control of the military and having the military, the rank and file in complete rebellion, a revolution cannot succeed. And this is so clearly obvious in Burma. The situation from what I can tell with the general strikes, the movement against the government, the military coup is supported across the board by many sectors of society, yet there is no unifying force to take power. And there is no way to, the military seems, there is no rebellion amongst the rank and file. And I don't know if anybody can add to that. John's question was about the vast corruption in the military and how far down in the ranks it goes. But without that, it's not possible to win a revolution without control of the military. So thank you. It's really a pleasure to be amongst comrades internationally in this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl, for your questions. I think it's an important question as well. Learning from these lessons from history and what it means for us today in our situation. And I think these classic questions and still matter a lot for us today. And the last questions, well, there are a number of questions from the chat box, but I'm just gonna sort of combine them into one. So thank you, comrades, for asking these questions in the chat box, but unfortunately I will have to sort of combine your questions into one, basically. So we have several questions about the role of international actors, Western imperialism, but as well as rising giants such as China and for example, in today's conflict in Burma and Thailand, more specifically. And there are also some specific questions about future scenarios in Burma, right? So whether what sort of scenarios will play out in the future? Do we comrade asked, for example, whether it's going to be a continuous, long, protracted mass movement, or whether we'll see increasing number of people taking up arms to fight against the regime, the increasingly brutal regime. So we have questions of imperialism. We have questions of how to settle, how to debate differences among the left, and how the left should respond to political crisis and the military, and also the broader questions about international actors' involvement in these conflicts. So
thanks, Ika. Actually, I've been a leftist for 35 years. So I wanted to also weigh in on some of the general comments. And one of the things that we need to understand is that, when I became a leftist back 35 years ago, there was so little gender sensitivity. There was no inclusion of migrants, no thought of migrants, of refugees, of indigenous peoples. There was very little diversity in the way people organize and worked together. In fact, we used to tease people for being cappuccino communists. They will be talking about communism over cappuccinos, which in those days were a very expensive form of coffee. So I think we need to understand now the challenge is that whether you're in Burma or Thailand or elsewhere, we still haven't really addressed the needs of young workers, of diverse young workers, because we haven't been able to push back on the Uberization of work, where instead of being an employee, young people are told they are entrepreneurs. And actually, this is a very fundamental form of worker abuse, labor abuse. And so we do need to actually really push back on that. Because the Grab, which is the Southeast Asian version of Uber, and all of these companies, these kinds of jobs were seen originally as an extra job you had to your normal day job. But now it is actually your day job without any social protections. And we do need to understand that, and the intersection of that in terms of how we address questions of climate change. We're grappling with COVID, but the reality is that in Southeast Asia, climate change is going to bite us on the bum whether we are ready for it or not. And that is going to be a fundamental workers' problem. We need to address it, and we need to also address the corporate capture of the climate change space. So those are the kinds of issues that we do need to take into account. Now I will go back into my Burma hat. Firstly, the reason people are calling for US intervention is that they were calling for UN intervention and nothing happened. They called for ASEAN intervention and nothing happened. All we got was bullshit. So it is inevitable they're going to call for US intervention because they see the military in Burma is afraid of the US. And the military in Burma has invested millions of dollars to lobby the US. They don't give a shit about ASEAN. In fact, today at the Armed Forces Parade, just as the military was exercising its most lethal crackdown on unarmed civilians in the whole of the country, who was there? India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Russia, China, Laos, Vietnam, and of course, Thailand. That they were cheering on a military parade, knowing full well that this bloody military was committing crimes against humanity against unarmed civilians. So if the local people are saying, US come save us, now you can understand this is not about imperialism or pro-imperialism or counter-imperialism. The issue is that those Russia and China were the main allies of this military before the coup and after the coup. They are the ones protecting this regime in the UN Security Council. So this is where we are standing. The other thing too is that in this picture, several hundred police have resigned their jobs, fled into India or gone into hiding because they refuse to carry out orders to kill civilians. Rank and file soldiers abused by their commanding officers and not wanting to kill people have defected. The committee representing the National Parliament is organizing a national unity government because the government elected and led by Aung San Suu Kyi finishes its term on the 30th of March. The new government, which was elected in November, was supposed to take over in 1st of April. So the committee representing the National Parliament has entered into an agreement with ethnic organizations who command several ethnic armies to form a national unity government. And people are already putting up insignia of the new federal army. People are starting to realize that no one's going to fight for them unless they fight for themselves. And the human toll is going to be so high because the military has a four-cut strategy. Traditionally, if they are fighting with any armed group, all the civilians in that area are considered combatants and will be killed as such. Women will be raped as a strategy to demoralize the host community and the enemy fighters. That is what we are expecting, right? So we do need to understand there is a sense of urgency. And when we look at that, then we also need to understand that we have to keep the visibility up. The military regime was playing poker and gambling on the fact that somehow the world will react to their coup in the same way it reacted to the 2014 Thailand coup. Very quickly, it was business as usual. Here it's not the case. Why are workers holding up brand names in their protests? Because They know that the local factory is part of a supply chain of an international brand name. And while the local subcontractors might not care so much about their work or their rights, they know that brand names are much more sensitive to reputational risk. This is the kind of work we've been investing in the ground in terms of helping people find ways to gain access to remedy, even in the toughest of situations. Yeah, and there are 3 major labor configurations in the country. It's complex, but all of them now are on the streets fighting for the lives of their workers. And we need to push the international corporations who have suppliers in the country or who have a presence in the country, like Total Oil, to ensure that they speak up for the right to organize, the right to strike, the right to assemble, and to ensure that they actually pay the wages of the workers, regardless of whether they are on strike, whether they've been killed, whether they've been detained. Thank you.
I try to tell the people and about how can we win the dictator. I think the only way that the people here can win the dictator is to form a national union, and we are working on that. We have finally we have a worker unions. Is a national union for Thai people, for every sector, and we try to recruiting everyone from every sector together to join this union, and we try to do a cultural work about to tell the people that we are the same. We are all the worker of the society, and we are the 99%. And in the May, the two next month, we have this the event on the first May, the May Day. We call it Worker Fest, and we will try to invite all of the people in every sector together to palettes, that to show who are the important people in this society, and we have to invite them to register to the worker unions, and maybe I thought General Prayut Chan-o-cha will be Thailand Prime Minister for at least 6 years, and in between that, I hope we can make worker unions strong, and maybe we plan to general style to kick them off the government and from the government of the worker, and we talk about worker party, because Thailand have no worker party for a long time.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway that we can have with regards to Myanmar right now is we need to expose our own government hypocrisy with regard to their relation to Myanmar. Although in the case of Indonesia, you can say that foreign minister has really quite supportive for the democratization process, but in terms of the reality on the ground to what happens in Indonesia, you can say that it's exposed their own hypocrisy, because the junta can easily dismiss the demand for more dialogue, for more peaceful negotiation between the junta and people in Myanmar, because they see even in Indonesia, there's no genuine peaceful process, right? So I think the main takeaway is, in order to reduce the pressure for the people in Myanmar, we have to make a strong challenge against the anti-democratic tendency within our own government. So the demand for more substantial negotiation, peaceful process can be achieved because the government itself, the government that coming from the Asian country, has really their own democratic process. So the thing is, in order to support our Myanmar comrade against the junta, we're not only have to create our own solidarity network at Asian level, but also we have to pressure our own government to be more democratic in not only treating their process in Myanmar conflict, but also what happens in here, because the junta can use this hypocrisy card against our government, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to start in, we have to level of battlefield, what happens inside and also what happened outside. Sure. That would be my takeaway.
Well, I'd actually like to take up this question of the working class very quickly and draw on some of the experiences that we've had here, especially with the labor center that's aligned to PLM, which is the BMP, the Solidarity of Filipino Workers. A key question is how to mobilize various sections of the workforce, including around some of the broader political issues of the day. We are involved in factory strikes. We're involved in campaigns in hospitals around particular issues and so on. And some of these we are even winning, even during the period of COVID. But the key question is, how do we mobilize this more consistently and generalize some of this stuff? And I think one of the things that we're learning is we use a range of tactics, from the immediate questions of on-the-job questions that they face to broader political questions. So for example, May 1 is coming up. And one of the things that we're discussing is holding labor consultative assemblies in various factories, in various areas, to sort of see whether we can't launch a movement for national survival, which is the key question now in terms of COVID and the economic crisis. The other tactic that we're also discussing with some public sector unions is the elections coming up, where some of the leaders want to challenge the government policies through the electoral arena. And we're having this discussion as well. So the key question is, how do you mobilize? And trying to figure out a range of tactics in order to do that. And the electoral arena, our experience, where we've had people in Congress and electoral interventions over 3 decades, is that the key thing is not to play the electoral game the way they played, but to find a way to link this up with the mass movement and mass struggle. That's the only way we can make significant gains in the electoral arena, not to play it the way the game is played by the capitalist parties. And this is the main lesson after 3 decades of electoral intervention, including having seats in Congress, that we have drawn from our experience. Final point is the point about the climate change question being captured by the corporate agenda. I think generally speaking, this has been the case in terms of the environmental movement and this whole thing about green capitalism that we have had to contest. But I think the youth are playing a really important role here. And, you know, the sort of Greta Thunberg plus phenomena, where they're really putting an anti-capitalist message on the agenda. And I think that the youth movement in the climate movement is a very important and exciting development for us to relate to.
I think I just want to make a couple of points throughout the conversation that we had. I think one is like, there's no shortcut in the struggle. I think we all have a role to play. We all have to, again, as I mentioned earlier, we need to reposition ourselves, our role in the people's movement and how we're going to build this people's movement. And I think the question about, for example, you know, people asking help from US and so on and so forth, that shows how desperate people are. For example, I saw in Twitter, like how Myanmar younger generation in Twitter is desperate for solidarity. Even when you tweet about something about Myanmar, you get like 100 and 200 kind of retweets because there's a desperation for solidarity and desperation for people to listen to them. Only when we have a platform, a people's movement that is sustainable, and there's a lot of other people's movement around the world is strong and exists, and I think people will shift their attention to that people movement and they will call for solidarity from them, but not from the those in power like US or any other countries. I think that's very important. So as I say, there's no shortcut, and I think we all have a role to play to build the movement together. And there's also our role to play to build the critical mass within that movement as well, so that they will be the one who send the message that, you know, who we need to reach out for solidarity, and that they're the only one who actually can bring the change end of the day. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for our comrades tonight, for our speakers, our interpreters, our comrades from the region and from all around the world who participate in our discussion tonight. It's a very engaging and vibrant discussion, and I hope it can, you know, gives up some insights and inspire us to do better in our struggle and to formulate and implement better tactics in our day-to-day praxis. Of course, this is not the end of our conversation. I believe we will still meet each other online and maybe offline later once the pandemic ends in the region or in other countries. Please do keep in touch, and again, in solidarity with the protest movements and with the working people in Burma and Thailand. And with that, I would like to conclude our session for tonight. Again, thank you so much for your participation. See you in another round of discussion, or see you on the streets. Thank you. Now, before